Today's daf is daf tes vav, and what we discussed on the top of the Amud was the concept of what's called Trey Ruby, which we're going to get into today. Mirz Hashem here on daf tes vav. We have two rows, and the issue is a Jewish girl. She was not married. Anyway, she was raped, and the question is, what is the status of the child? And not only that, what is her status? Because if the Boel, if the Anos was a guy, then she becomes psula l'kahuna, and this might affect also the status of the child. And the Gemara sets up Trey Ruby, which means that the rape situation happened outside the city, and there were chronos shel tzipori that were passing by. So that these are seos, different kinds of caravans and so forth, and someone came out of the caravan perhaps, or out of the city perhaps, we don't know, and did this terrible action. And therefore we have two roves. There's rove of the city that are ksherim, and rove of the shayaros, the chronos, are also ksherim. That was the statement of Rabbi Yanai on the top of Daf Tesvav Amud Aleph. So we got up to Kihechi. I'm sorry, Kiha. I shouldn't say Kihechi, but Kiha. And that would be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down from the top. Kiha to Chi Asar Avdimi Amar Zeiri Amar Rabbi Chanina, the Amri lo Amar Zeiri Amar Rabbi Chanina, Holchim Acharov Ha'ir, the Ein Holchim Acharov Seah. Now, if you take this literally, then this statement is just undermining everything that we've said before. We're trying to set up Rov Seah. Seah are the caravans that are passing by outside the city. Gemara says klapi laya, just the opposite. If you want to choose a rove to rely on, then the better of the two roves, hani naide, would be the seah, because they are in motion, in movement. They are moving, and one is paresh from the moving seah. And then we could apply the principle of kol de parish miruba parish, of rove. But Hani, if you talk about the Bnei Ha'ir, then she may have entered into the place where the Boel found her. Let's say she went into his house. We don't know that that happened yet, but it might have happened. And that's called kvi v'kaime. The people in the city are in their homes. That's called a makom kvius, right? A permanent place. And the halacha is, as we're going to develop it today, that kol kavua kemechtzal mechtedam. Anytime there's a suffix, the kavua, did she go into this house? Did she go into that house? That's going to be 50-50. That's not a rove. Ella, says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Chanina, to interpret his words, we will rely on Rov Ha'ir, and at this point, I guess we're assuming that somebody was parish from the city and found this girl outside the city and raped her. And the condition here that Rabbi Chanina is setting is it's not enough that you have Rov Ha'ir, because again, as we said, Rov Ha'ir has that problem of maybe she went to him, to his house, and that would make it kavua, but we have to have another rove, and that's the rove seah. And it's only when we put these two roves together and we have Trey Ruby, only then can we be machshir ha to kahuna. The ein holchem acharov ha'ir greit nasav lo acharov seah greit nasav. We're not going to rely on one single rove. Let's say rove ha'ir. For example, when there's no shayara, there's no seah that's passing by outside the city. Nor will we rely on a case where she was raped far away from the city in such a way that we don't assume anyone came out of the city. So we don't have the rove of ear. We only have the rove of the seah that's passing by. My time. Now, the way we interpret this Gemara's question, my time, based on Rashi and the Shita Mekubetes, is the Gemara wants to know, why don't we rely on rove seah? I mean, after all, you've already established that rove seah, because of Naidi, is a perfectly reliable rove. And there's no kavua element here because there was no bia that took place in the chronos, but rather somebody came out of the chronos and was boel. So that's the really fundamental and reliable rove over here. So what would be the reason that in a case where there's rove seah, we would not rely on rove seah unless there was also a rove ha'ir? And the Gemara answers, Gzera rove seah unto rove ha'ir. We're afraid that if in a case where she had this terrible thing happen to her outside the city at a distance, and we relied on the seah that was going by, we might then mistakenly assume that rove ha'ir would also likewise be reliable. Because in the mind of the spectator, what's the difference between rove seah and rove ha'ir? In both cases, we're going to be machshir. We're machshir and rove seah, we're going to be machshir and rove ha'ir. And yet we cannot rely on rove ha'ir because of the suffix that maybe she went into him and he's kavua. Kol kavua, kemechtzal mechtzadam. Whereas for rove ha'ir nami, why don't we rely on rove ha'ir? Now the Gemara is going to spell out what we've been discussing about Peh, anticipating this Gemara. If she went into the city and visited one of the people living in the city, now I'm not sure exactly whether she did it deliberately in order to have znus or she did it naively and she was raped. But in any event, Ozli inu ligaba. Oh, so now the Gemara is talking not about a case where she went into him, but where he came out of the city. Is then called a parish meruva parish. So the Gemara says, look, tricha, we don't need the gzera because the case of the ka'ozli inhu ligaba, but rather we needed the ka'ozla ihi ligabayu. We're afraid of the situation in which she went into their home, their meaning any one of their homes, and that's where this escapade took place. And if she went into their homes, the havile kavua, so whenever we're going to rely on rove, in the case of rove of the Bnei Ya'ir, we always have to consider the possibility that she may have gone into his house. And since we don't know which house she went into, the kosher or the apostle, etc., therefore we're going to have to apply the principle of Rabbi Zera of kol kavua kemechtzal mechtzadam. And since that rove ha'ir is not reliable because it might be a case of kavua, therefore we're afraid to rely on rove ha'ir, lest it be a case of she going to him, which would be kavua. So therefore we're going to add the other rove, which is rove seah, and that is a case of naidi, and therefore it's called the parish meruba parish. The Gemara asks, "Mi ba'inu trei rube." Do we really find any precedent for this halacha that you need two roves, and you can't be reliant on one single rove? And anytime there's a rove, you're going to say, well, maybe there's kavua, or maybe the mind of the spectator will confuse a rove of kol de parish meruba parish naidi with a rove of kol kavua. And that's not so. The Gemara is now going to prove from a brayso that we go with this halach of rove all the way. And we're going to decide, is it called the parish or is it kol kavua? Batanya Teisha Chanuyos. You have 9 butcher shops in the city. Kulam ochros b'sar shchuta v'yachas b'cheres basar nevela. We have 9 out of 10 butcher shops that are selling kosher meat. 1 is selling non-kosher meat. But lokach me'achas man, a man went into one of these stores. Which store did he go into? Sfeiko also. Even though 9 out of 10 of the butcher shops are kosher, and you would have therefore said, let's apply rove, and statistically we have 90% of a percentile of a probability that he bought kosher meat. It's awesome. But the suffix is generated in kvius, in a makom kavua, because the chanuyos are stationary. And he doesn't know which one he went into, so he's asking about the chanus. Which chanus did he go into? And even though you might have argued that 9 out of 10 are kosher, and therefore he went into a kosher butcher shop, no. The halach is that when the suffix is nolad b'makom kvius, kol kavua kemechtal mechtadav ubenimta. But if on the other hand he finds a piece of meat out in the street, halach acharov, since rov of the chanuyos in that city are selling kosher meat, he could assume that it came out of one of the 9 kosher butcher shops, so therefore, allowed to eat the meat, it's kosher. Okay. Now, v'chi tema, the Gemara asks, maybe you'll tell me the following, that the price of 9 chanuyos. So 1 second. So let's backtrack. So what did the Gemara prove now from the brisa? That if he finds a piece of meat in the street, we'll apply the principle of rove, because it's a makom dinaidi and called the parish meruva parish. But you're not afraid that maybe if we allow him to rely on rove, he'll even rely on rove in a case where he went into a store and the suffix was nolad b'makom kvius, and it's called the par and it's called kavuk k'vechtal mechzna. We don't inhibit you from applying the principle of rove, because maybe you'll apply it even to a case of kavua. So it says, the Gemara says, v'chitema, you know what? Maybe that price of techa chanuyos also has trei rube. Why? She'ein dalsos medina nu'ulos deka'asi la miruba dialva. So let's say you're living in Eretz Yisrael, where most of the people are Jewish. Is that so, Rabbi? Most of the people are Jewish? I don't even know. Yeah? When you go to Efrat, you wonder where the majority is, Anyway, so the city is made up of mostly Jewish people. I'm sorry, let's start again. The state, the nation is made of mostly Jewish people, and the city is made of mostly Jewish people. And therefore, we have 2 rows. Why? Because ein dalsos medina neulos. There are people coming in with meat, let's say in this case, from outside the city. They're coming into Yerushalayim from Tel Aviv and from Haifa and from Beersheba, and they're coming into Yerushalayim. They have a rove of Jewish kosher meat, and therefore we have 2 roves. So the Gemara says, "Nein, ha'amar Rabbi Zera." Back to Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera says, Afal Pisha Dalsos Medina Nu'ulos, which means we only have 1 rove. We only have the rove of the local butcher shops. And yet we're going to rely on Kol the Parch, Meru Parch, in the case where he finds the meat outside. We're not going to be afraid that maybe he'll confuse it with Kavua. So you see that 1 rove is reliable. And the Gemara answers, Maila Osu B'Yuchsin. You're right. In Kol Dini Torah, we're going to rely on rove. And Kol the Parish, Meruba Parish, we're not going to be Gozer, Xeros. Maybe he'll confuse it in the case of Kavua. But in the case of Kahuna, here's where we up the ante. We demand a higher standard. We need trei rubies. And the reason for that is because we Kohanim, Amiyuchasim, we want to set up a higher bar, a higher standard in demanding for Hechsha l'Kahuna, for Yuchsei Kahuna. And the impression you get here is that this is a special gzera in the area of Yuchsin. And it's probably all D'Rabbanan, because the Torah would rely on one row. And now we have a mind-boggling chiddush here, that kavua is even lekula. We know of kavua lechumra, and therefore, even though there's only 1 out of 10 treifa butcher shops, it's as if there are 5 out of 10 treifa butcher shops, and we completely null and void the rove. But that's lahachmir, and therefore, instead of relying on rove that the meat is kosher, we're going to assume it might not be kosher, and we're going to apply the principle of safek doraisa lechumra. Don't eat the meat. That's lechumra. And now Rabbi Zeir is saying that kol kavua works the other way as well, even lekula. How did Rabbi Zeir find in the literature of the Tanoim some sort of proof or source that led him to prove that the halacha of kavua works even lekula? If you're going to say me teisha chanus to the brisa of teisha chanus kula mochas pasuk shudachas but basan available lokach meyachas nevedi yedemez and lokach sfeiko asavudimtza alachach harov. So now, because there's one single butcher shop that's selling the vela, therefore we mess up the rove. In a case where he went in and he doesn't know which store he went into, it we're going to apply kavua. That's kavua l'chumra, hasam l'chumra. Prove to me, Rabbi Zeir, that you have a source from which you derive the conclusion that kol kavua is even l'kula. Ela teisha shrotzim. We have a brisa that discusses tumas shrotzim. Now you have 9 shrotzim. Utzfardea echad. Tzfardea is not metamet. So amongst the shrotzim, you've got one single sheretz that's not metamet. Beineim, amongst them. He doesn't know where he touched it. Here we're going to go lekula based on kol kavua kemechtzal mechtzadami. He doesn't know which one he touched, and all these shrotzim, including the tzvardea, are b'makom kavua. And now we have a suffix 50-50 based on kol kavua. And we're going to be matayr in Rishus Harabim. Why? Because the din is that Safek Tum Rishus Harabim Sveiko Tar. Okay, now we have a source for Rabbi Zeir. And Kol Kavua works even Lakula, and therefore in Rishus Harabim, in the case of Kol Kavua Kamech Talmechson, would be matayr him, because Safek Tum Rishus Harabim Sveiko Tar. But you're just begging the question. Okay, you got it from a brisa. Very nice. But where did the brisa get it from? Where's the biblical source that kol kavua is mafkia ro? Omar Kra, the Gemara answers that the Torah tells us in Parsha Shoftim, I believe it is, that v'chiyeh ish sonei l'reyehu v'arav lo v'kama olaviko nefesh v'meis v'nos el achas ha'orim ha'el, the Parsha of Rotzach v'shogeg and Ir Miklat. And now we have a drasha of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon appears in Masechet Sanhedrin on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. What was the case? A man had kavanah to kill a specific individual, and instead he killed someone else. Rav Shimon says he's pot. He did not have kavanah to kill this person, and kavanah is a precondition in the mechayev of Ritzicha. The Rabbanan disagree and say that he's chayev because he did aimed to kill, and he killed. And the Gemara asks there in Sanhedrin, from whence did Rabbi Shimon derive his conclusion that a miskavin lara gezev har gezev patur? And the Gemara quotes the pasuk to explain Rabbi Shimon that ad she's kavin lo, that the Torah says v'kam alav, meaning he specifically the arev lo, he was interested lo in killing so and so. And now the Gemara asks for Rabbanan. Rabbanan reject Rabbi Shimon. They hold that if he was miskavin laro, not this one but somebody else, but he killed this one, he's chayav misa. He's a full-fledged rotzeah. So what are they going to do with the drasha of the arev lo? Amri debei Rabbi Yanai prat lezorik even ludo. A man throws a stone, a killer stone, into a group of people. That group is made up of both Jews and non-Jews. He had kavanah to kill one of them. And he's potter. Why? Because he did not have kavanah to kill a Jew. So that even though the Rabbanan are of the opinion that if he's niskamin lara gezev har gezev, he's chayav, that's only because his kavanah was to kill a Jew. But now we have a mixture of Jews and goyim, and he throws a stone in, and he didn't have kavanah to kill a Jew. And now the Gemara is going to go into an analysis of his mindset. Did he have in mind to kill a Jew? Did he not have in mind to kill a Jew? And it all is all dependent upon Rov and Kavua. What was the nature of this mixture of Goyim and Jews? There was only one Jew amongst 9 other Goyim. And we need a pasuk to tell me that Azorik Evan. Why do I need this pasuk to teach me his patur? Typically, the Ruba Knanim. He's got Rov Goyim, and the Torah says to rely on Rov. So he was niskavin laragas hagoy in all chances, right? 9 out of 10. Instead, he killed a Jew. He's patur. Inami palgo safik nefesh lahakil. Even if it's 50% Goyim and 50% Jews, I don't need a pasuk to tell me he's patur. We have a principle called safik nefesh lahakil. And Rashi derives this principle from a pasuk of Itzilu Ha'edav, and Shaft Edav Itzilu Ha'edav. So in what scenario do I need this chiddush that he's patur in a case where he threw a stone into a mixture of Jews and non-Jews and he killed a Jew? It's clear that his kavanah was for the rov. And the rov here are Yisraelim, 9 out of 10. And I would have therefore said that perhaps in this case, he should be chayav. But the Arev Lo is going to teach me that he's patur. Why is he patur? Because the Havile Nani Kavua, B'chol Kavua, Kemetzal Mechzidam. Who's moving towards whom? Is the Rotzeach moving towards the Nirtzach or the other way around? The Nirtzachim are all Kavua B'mkomo. And the Rotzeach throws the stone. And therefore, we cannot apply the principle of Kol the Parish Miruba Parish. Instead, we'll apply the principle of Kol Kavua, Kemetzal Mechzidam. And this is a case of Lakula, that because of that one single Knani out of 10, who is Kavua B'mkomo, we're going to pater him up, and we're going to exonerate him from being condemned as a Rotzeach because of the principle of Kol Kavua. Here we have Kol Kavua, Lakula. Now, the Gemara doesn't ask the other question. What's Reb Shimon going to say? Does he not have the halacha of Kavua Lakula? I mean, he used the same pasuk. to teach me that Niskamin Lara Gazev Har Gazev Pot. Gemara doesn't raise this. Okay, now let's go back to the case of this young girl that was raped. Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Yochanan ben Nuri that if most of the members of the city are ksherim, then she is ksher l'kuhuna. And again, as we explained before, based on Rav, this is a case of Trey Ruby. We have Rov Ha'ir that are ksherim and Rov Ha'shayara sha'av Rabbi Yossi ve'ir ksherim. But if not for the Trey Ruby, we would not be machsh. Itmar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Yossi. We paskin like Rabbi Yossi, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that if you have Rov Ha'ir ksherim, she's ksher l'kuhuna. And Rav seems to be paskening halacha like Rabbi Yossi. And then we're talking about one row. There's no indication here that for a necessity of Trey Ruby. Because all Rabbi Yossi says is that im rov ha'ir ksherim is then she's ksher l'kuhuna. There was no requirement of a second row. Rav Hanan bar Rava Omar Rav, he had a different transmission of Rav, Horas Shahaisa, that when Rabbi Yossi paskins that we could be machshir based on rov here and all we need is one rov, that was only a horah for that particular moment in time. There was a pressing need for that heter, for that leniency. And that's called horah shah. And that's why we paskin like Rabbi Yossi to be matir with rov echad. But l'doros, when it's not horah shah, then we cannot be machshir unless we have trei ruby. Masiv Rabbi Yirmiyah uli yuchsin lo beina and trei ruby. The Gemara understood now at this point that Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, in the name of Rav, who paskin halach Rabbi Yossi, means that you can be machshir even with one row. So the Gemara asks, are you telling me that even with regard to yuchsin, lahachshir l'kuna, all we need is one row? But Tanan, and now we're going to try to prove, based on a very complicated Mishnah in Masechet Machshirin, that we must have two rows.